Hello and welcome back to my channel. This is Ether Amara. So in today's video, I'm going to be doing another PDF downloaded book review for a historical series of books that I was able to come by in an open book platform online. This one was drawn up by UNESCO International Scientific Commitment for the Drafting of a General History of Africa. And there are a few different series books. This is the second series, but they do have varying books regarding ancient civilizations across Africa, different art forms, a wide-ranged historical feature where you can learn about ancient history predating the colonization and understanding what were the names of these kingdoms before it was placed under the name Africa. So this is what the book looks like here, and I do plan on printing this one, but until then, I'm going to go ahead and share it from the digital platform. And this one is General History of Africa. This is Volume 2, Ancient Civilizations of Africa. And this was edited by G. Mokhtar. So I'm going to scroll through here, and it will start with the series of books. There's Volume 1, which is the Methodology in African Prehistory. This volume, which is Volume 2, Ancient Civilizations of Africa. Then you have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And I do plan on putting together an entire book series of African history that I'm going to be adding to my other PDF books that I have shared here to really immerse myself in prehistory of the continent and understanding the beautiful kingdoms that were within this continent and how much of an impact they made before things were drastically changed. So I'm going to go down through here, and it just gives you information into when this was first published. And then we're going to get to the table of contents. So I love that this really talks about varying kingdoms, and specifically it talks a lot about Egypt. It'll talk about their economy, cultures, and their societies, what they looked like. It's going to talk about what Nubia looked like before Napata. It'll talk about the importance of Nubia, a link between Central Africa and the Mediterranean. Lots of really good things here. It'll talk about the Proto-Berbers, the Roman and post-Roman period in North Africa. Lots of history that I feel a lot of people have a lack of awareness to when it comes to understanding this continent and how long of a history there is. And when you dig back into the history, you'll really begin to understand how magnificent this continent was, is, and ultimately should be returned to. It'll also give you the bibliography and the indexes. And then it gives you here the list of figures. And like I said, there's a lot within here, so I'm just going to briefly go over what, is within this very briefly, but there's a lot to kind of get into here, which I find to be very helpful in my African studies. It'll give you a list of plates, and this talks a lot about the artworks from varying societies and kingdoms, different forms of pottery, their statues, understanding of the Egyptian art forms, sandstone, lots of really beautiful things. And it's not only centered on one part of the continent, it is a wide variety of historical history. So you'll see things here regarding Libya, Egypt, Ethiopia, all of these places, post-colonial time period. Lots of good stuff. So you got the introduction here. And this one has 825 pages, so there's definitely a heavy read here, and I'm definitely going to take my time going through it. I have a lot of information that I have already acquired, and I think it's nice to have varying sources. I will definitely provide the website where I was able to find these books. So there's a lot of really great things here. We'll talk about writing and environment. And this one's specifically talking about the writings within Egypt, something that I find very fascinating, looking at the hieroglyphs and understanding how they communicated information. I think it is just astounding how ancient texts were used and how sad it is to see a lot of these things disappearing and not being preserved to pass down to the younger generations. Lots of good stuff here. And it does have some illustrations here. You see there are Egyptian palette stones, Palermo stone, palette stones. Lots of statues. And I love here that it will show a lot of the papyrus that is used. I am someone who is very fortunate enough to have gotten my hands on Egyptian papyrus, and I feel like it is such a ancient way of recording text. It is very much paper that was used throughout history to record things on, and I'm so excited to have been able to interact with it and keep it in my safe keep, so to speak, because papyrus is something that is very ancient, the way that it was created and how the resources are depleting and disappearing is upsetting, but I love being able to connect with ancient ways of making paper and writing forms. So this will talk about here the origin of the ancient Egyptians by Sheikh Anta Diop. Lots of good history there. And then it'll kind of give you some examples of what some word sentences mean written out in hieroglyphs. Then it gives a lot of information about the race of Egyptians. I feel like there is a lot of misinformation when it comes to who the Egyptians were, how it was not just a linear group of people, understanding that, skin color, like it kind of states here, the melanin dosage test, understanding that Egyptian people were melanated individuals. They had varying degrees of skin color, and they weren't one set group of people. I think there's just so much misinformation and hatred around who the Egyptians were, and they were a very mixed color palette of people. It'll talk about blood groups, lots of really interesting information. And what I find really interesting is when we're talking about Egypt, it states a lot here in the word usage about Negro, Black, and who the Egyptians were and what they looked like. I think it's very interesting, when they're talking about Osiris, they referenced him as a great Negro, even within hieroglyphs. They use the word black a lot, even within the hieroglyphs. And I think that is so interesting to know that when they were talking about Hathor or when they were talking about Isis, there was an emphasis on the black woman and the black women. So there was never a divide between whether those were melanated people or not. We knew that they were melanated people, and that was reflected even within their hieroglyphs. So it'll give you a lot of cultural data, linguistic affinity. It definitely draws a contrast between Egyptian, Coptic, and Wolof languages that come from Senegal. I think that it's nice to see that communion of linguistics when it comes to seeing a place that people consider the West and trying to separate it from, where Egypt is. I think that it is very interesting to know the truth behind even the correlations of languages. So it gives you some references to Egyptian words and Wolof words. Very good to know when it comes to how close Egypt and places like Senegal have a continuum of history. So it will give you some more art forms here, how people were depicted within the civilization. Lots of good stuff here. And like I said, I'm going to do a more immersive review for this one once I get it printed out, so I'll be able to really share a little bit more. It'll also give you some of the maps that a lot of us don't get to see about what the names really were. So when we're talking about, the Sinai and Nubia and that area where the Red Sea is and the Mediterranean, understanding what these names were before even the cartography scale changed, I think is very interesting to understand as a reference point. What were these places known as before people who didn't understand came in and disrupted what systems they already had? So this is a very deep dive into that history. Like I said, it is definitely nice to know with a lot of the racial tensions that Egypt and Western parts of Africa were connected. There was never a separation of people, considering they migrated, they moved, there was a lot of movement, and they communed together as peoples. And I think it's beautiful to see that always being reflected within history and how people can try to manipulate that and make it one linear way and separating by skin colors when that was never the intention of the people that came from these regions of the continent. Lots of good stuff here, lots of imagery. as I stated, how they told stories and reflected that within the stone. And I think it's just really beautiful to see that. It talks about the relations of Egypt with the rest of, the continent, understanding, like I said, that shared history that they had, even with regions within the West, regions within Central and Southern of the continent. I think it's beautiful to know the real truth when it comes to how people communed with one another. So you'll see here understanding the influences of Tanzania and how close, these places are to each other, even when we're going to the Far East. Lots of beautiful information here. It'll talk about the legacy of pharaonic Egypt. Lots of really cool stuff here. So I'm definitely going to follow up once I get this one printed and do a share through for this one. And I definitely want to get into all of the 8 volumes that they have, because these are definitely something to keep as a reference point to really know the truth of what this continent was. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it 2 thumbs up. Like I stated before, I will be following up with a more immersive run through for this one. Like I said, there's 825 pages, so this will definitely take up a lot of time, but it's definitely worth it. And I hope you all enjoyed this book share. Thanks for watching.